I didn't ruin my life in one bad decision. I ruined it by staying. That's the part people don't talk about. Everyone warns you about reckless choices, impulsive mistakes, dramatic turning points. No one warns you about what happens when you wait too long to leave something that no longer fits. From the outside, my life looked calm. Stable. Reasonable. The kind of life people nod at approvingly. I had commitments, routines, people who expected me to show up and play my part. And I did. Every day. What I didn't have was urgency. I told myself there was time. Time to change. Time to speak. Time to become braver later. I believed patience was wisdom, and endurance was strength. I didn't realize patience can rot into fear. The first sign was boredom, not the restless kind, but the heavy, gray boredom that settles into your bones. The kind that makes days feel interchangeable. I would wake up already tired, not from lack of sleep, but from knowing exactly how the day would unfold. I stopped looking forward to things. Even good things. Even milestones. Everything felt like a checkpoint on a road I hadn't chosen. Still, I stayed. I stayed because leaving would disappoint people. I stayed because starting over felt irresponsible. I stayed because explaining myself seemed harder than enduring quietly. And most of all, I stayed because I was afraid that if I left, I would discover there was nothing better waiting for me. That fear is powerful. It convinces you that an unfulfilled certainty is safer than an uncertain possibility. I became very good at rationalizing. I told myself this was adulthood. That passion fades for everyone. That meaning is something you sacrifice in exchange for security. Sometimes I almost believed it. There were moments, small, sharp moments, when clarity tried to reach me. Watching someone else take a risk I wouldn't. Hearing a story that reminded me of who I used to be. Catching myself daydreaming about a version of my life that never happened. Each time, I pushed the feeling away. I said, not now. I said, later. I said, it's too late anyway. The lie embedded itself slowly. I stayed in relationships that felt more like habits than connections. Conversations became predictable. We spoke about logistics, plans, responsibilities, never about doubt. Never about fear. Never about the quiet sadness that lived between us. I learned to keep my questions to myself. The dangerous thing about staying too long is that you stop noticing what you're losing. You don't see time passing, you feel it compressing. Years shrink into a blur of routines and obligations, and one day you realize you can't remember when you last felt fully alive. For me, that realization came in an ordinary place, sitting on public transport, watching the city pass by. I saw my reflection in the window and felt a strange distance from it. Like I was looking at someone who had once had plans. I asked myself a question I had avoided for years: if nothing changes, can I live like this forever? The answer arrived immediately. No. That answer terrified me. Because it meant the life I had built wasn't wrong, it was incomplete. And incompleteness demands action. It demands honesty. It demands disruption. I wasn't ready for that. So I stayed longer. I stayed through growing resentment. Through quiet frustration. Through the slow erosion of my self-respect. I stayed until my dreams felt embarrassing. Until hope felt childish. Until wanting more felt like betrayal. And then, one day, something broke. Not explosively. Not publicly. I missed an opportunity one had once prayed for, not because it disappeared, but because I no longer recognized myself as someone who could take it. I watched it pass with a strange numbness, and that's when it hit me: I hadn't stayed because I was loyal. I had stayed because I was afraid. Afraid of failing. Afraid of starting late. Afraid of discovering that I was the only thing standing in my way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, replaying every moment I had postponed a decision, every time I chose comfort over truth. The weight of lost time pressed down on me harder than regret ever had. And for the first time, I admitted something that changed everything: staying had cost me more than leaving ever could. But by then, the damage wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real. It was written into my habits, my confidence, my sense of possibility. I didn't know yet how to leave. I only knew that if I stayed any longer, there would be nothing left of me to save. The decision to leave didn't arrive like courage. It arrived like exhaustion. I didn't wake up inspired. I woke up unable to pretend anymore. The energy it took to maintain a life that no longer felt like mine had finally exceeded the fear of changing it. That's when I understood something important. Most people don't stay because they're loyal. They stay because they're tired. I began to notice how small my world had become. How narrow my thinking was. How often I measured my choices by how little disruption they would cause instead of how much truth they contained. I had optimized my life for minimal friction. And in doing so, I had erased everything sharp, alive, and unpredictable. The first thing that cracked was my body. It always knows before the mind is ready to admit the truth. I was constantly tense. Sleep no longer rested me. I carried a low-grade anxiety that never fully spiked, it just lingered, day after day, like background noise. People asked if I was okay. I said yes automatically. The word had lost all meaning. The breaking point came quietly, during a conversation that shouldn't have mattered. Someone younger than me talked about taking a risk, moving, changing careers, starting over. They spoke with fear, but also with excitement. Their uncertainty sounded alive. I felt something inside me collapse. Not jealousy. Grief. Grief for the version of myself who used to talk that way. Who used to believe life could expand instead of just repeat. I went home that evening and realized I had spent years managing my life instead of living it. Managing expectations. Managing appearances. Managing disappointment. All to avoid one difficult conversation with myself. That night, I made a list. Not of goals, of losses. Things I had postponed until later. Dreams I had quietly retired. Decisions I had let other people make for me by default. The list was longer than I expected. And at the bottom of it was the hardest truth of all: no one had trapped me here. I had stayed. That realization didn't feel empowering. It felt devastating. Because if I was responsible for staying, then I was also responsible for leaving. And leaving meant destroying a version of my life that other people depended on. I tried to imagine explaining it. The words never sounded right. How do you tell someone you're leaving not because something is wrong, but because nothing is right enough? So I delayed again. Days. Weeks. One last attempt to find peace where I was. One last effort to adjust my expectations downward. But something had shifted. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Every compromise felt heavier. Every routine more suffocating. Eventually, avoidance turned into anger. Not outwardly. Internally. A quiet resentment toward everything that required me to stay silent about who I was becoming. I started fantasizing about disappearance. Not death, absence. A clean break. No explanations. Just, gone. Starting over somewhere no one knew, the version of me that had settled for less. That fantasy scared me because it felt like relief. When you begin to see escape as peace, you're already in trouble. The actual leaving was anticlimactic. No dramatic confrontation. No final speech. Just decisions made one after another until momentum replaced doubt. I told people I needed space. That I needed time. I used words that sounded reasonable but meant nothing. The truth was simpler and harder: I couldn't stay without losing myself completely. The first days after leaving were disorienting. I expected relief. Instead, I felt exposed. Raw. Without the familiar structure, my identity felt unfinished. Like a sentence that stopped halfway through. I realized then that staying too long doesn't just delay change, it weakens you. It trains you to doubt your instincts. To distrust your desires. To believe that wanting more is irresponsible. Starting over wasn't heroic. It was humiliating. I questioned every choice. Every step felt late. I compared myself to who I thought I should have been by now. The weight of lost time pressed against every decision. And yet, beneath the fear, something else stirred. Not happiness. Possibility. For the first time in years, the future wasn't predetermined. That uncertainty terrified me, but it also woke something up. I began to see the cost of staying clearly. The subtle damage. The erosion of self-trust. The way time slips away not in dramatic losses, but in quiet compliance. I understood then that the real tragedy wasn't that I had stayed too long. It was that I had almost stayed forever. Still, leaving didn't fix everything. It didn't erase regret or magically restore confidence. What it did was remove the lie that things would somehow change on their own. They never do. Change demands loss. And the longer you wait, the more it takes from you. I wasn't free yet. I was just finally moving. And that movement, however late, mattered more than perfection ever could. Leaving didn't give me the life I imagined. It gave me the truth instead. And the truth was harder to carry than regret. I had believed that once I left, clarity would arrive. That confidence would return. That I would finally feel aligned with myself again. But what I felt first was grief, not for what I lost by leaving, but for what I lost by staying too long. You don't just walk away from years of postponement. You carry them with you. Every decision I made after leaving felt heavier than it should have. Not because it was wrong, but because it arrived late. I kept wondering who I might have been if I had acted sooner. How different my instincts would feel if I hadn't trained myself to ignore them. Lost time has a specific weight. It doesn't crush you all at once. It sits quietly on your chest and reminds you of itself whenever you hesitate. I learned quickly that starting over doesn't mean starting clean. It means starting honestly, with everything you avoided packed tightly inside you. Fear. Doubt. Shame. All of it. There were moments when I considered going back. Not because I believed it would fix anything, but because familiarity still whispered comfort. Staying had numbed me, but it had also protected me from uncertainty. Freedom, I discovered, is uncomfortable when you're not used to choosing yourself. I had to relearn how to trust my own voice. How to notice what felt right without immediately asking whether it was reasonable, acceptable, or convenient for others. That process was slow. Often humiliating. I second-guessed myself constantly. Sometimes I still do. But something important had changed. I was no longer lying to myself about why I felt trapped. I stopped pretending that endurance was a virtue on its own. Staying is only admirable when it doesn't require you to disappear. Loyalty is only meaningful when it includes honesty. Sacrifice without consent is just self-erasure. I wish I could say I found happiness quickly. I didn't. What I found was responsibility. For my choices. For my silence. For the years I gave away because I was afraid to disrupt a life that looked good enough. That responsibility didn't feel empowering at first. It felt sobering. But over time, it became grounding. Regret still visits me. Often in quiet moments. When I see someone take a chance I once avoided. When I realize how much energy it took just to survive my old life. When I understand how different my confidence might be if I hadn't spent years negotiating myself down. I don't try to silence that regret anymore. I listen to it. Because regret isn't just pain. It's information. It tells you where you betrayed yourself. It points to the values you ignored. It teaches you what matters, if you're brave enough to learn from it. The most difficult truth I had to accept was this: no one stole my life from me. I gave it away slowly. Not out of malice. Out of fear. Fear of disappointing others. Fear of making the wrong choice. Fear of discovering that wanting more might require losing what I already had. I don't blame myself the way I used to. I understand now that I did what I could with the courage I had at the time. But I don't excuse it either. Growth begins where excuses end. If there is meaning in my story, it isn't that it's ever too late. That phrase is comforting but incomplete. Some things don't come back. Some doors do close. Some versions of yourself only exist at certain moments in time. What is true is this: it's never too late to stop abandoning yourself. I no longer stay where I feel myself shrinking. I no longer wait for permission to want something different. I no longer confuse stability with fulfillment. And when fear tells me to wait, I listen carefully. Because waiting is how I lost myself the first time. If someone listening to this feels that quiet ache, the one that doesn't scream, but never fully goes away, don't ignore it. That ache is awareness. And awareness, once it arrives, doesn't leave quietly. Staying too long doesn't just cost you opportunities. It costs you belief in yourself. I stayed too long. I lost time I can never reclaim. But I didn't lose everything. I kept my voice. And this time, I use it. Even when it shakes.